Hello, everyone. I can see some people are still trickling in, but thank you very much for coming to our final project webinar in the Feminist Communities for Climate Justice current incarnation, let's say. You'll notice that we're actually in a Zoom meeting rather than a traditional webinar format, and that's because we're hoping for this particular piece to be a bit more interactive. But welcome to our Building Climate Justice Communities webinar. I'm Vanessa Conroy, the project officer on the Feminist Communities for Climate Justice project. And today we're going to basically be exploring how you can get involved in building your own climate justice communities. And that'll be through using our project toolkits, which you will all also get to try out yourself. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So I've introduced myself just because we'll have lots of people kind of attending. You're free to introduce yourselves in the chat with your name and your organization if that's applicable, where you're listening from today, whether that's somewhere in Ireland or outside Ireland, and also why you decided to sign up for this webinar. And because we're not in a traditional webinar format, we're in a meeting format, just some kind of etiquette, just to make sure that your mics are on mute unless you're taking part in the Q&A section and the workshopping sections of the webinar. So we can go to the next slide there. This is just a brief running order of what we'll be doing today. Um, like the kind of the key piece of this webinar is that we're going to give you guys actually about 20 minutes or so to really dig into one of the activities yourself so that you can really test the toolkits before you use them with your own groups. But that's what we're hoping the running order will be today. And thank you for joining us during what's probably your lunch hour as well. It's very appreciated. So you can go to the next slide there. And just briefly talking about the Feminist Communities for Climate Justice project. What we want to do is to change the way that climate change is talked about in our communities on the ground. Currently, people very much feel like that they need to know the science, they need a degree, or that it's a middle class problem. But really, climate change will impact all of us, and particularly communities who are already disadvantaged, who are already socially excluded. Um, and for those communities who maybe are fighting fires in their lives, trying to put food on the table, trying to keep the lights on, climate change might not seem like an immediate issue that they should be concerned with. But what we want to do is to highlight the impacts of climate change in everyday areas of our lives, like linking it to the housing crisis, to transport access, to healthcare, to food, and we also want to tie it to social justice and inequality in our society. And so, really, the project at its heart wants to upskill community knowledge and talking about climate change in a different way and maybe a more accessible way as well. So, you can go to the next slide there. So why this project came about, it's a joint project between the National Women's Council of Ireland and Community Work Ireland, and it basically fulfills the needs of both of the project partners in that for Community Work Ireland, this is responding to an identified need of community workers where they recognised that climate change and the policy created by our government would impact communities that they're working with who might be more marginalized or socially excluded in a more negative way, but they didn't feel confident communicating the climate crisis. They didn't feel like they had the tools to do so. And so that's why, for Community Work Ireland, that's why they came to the table on this project. For the National Women's Council, it was mandated by our membership for us to start pursuing climate justice and climate change into the council's existing body of work, and also to create a feminist analysis of climate justice. As well as that, we have a lot of data and policy gaps in Ireland on the impacts of the climate crisis, not just for women, but for women in all of their diversity and for multiple marginalised groups in this country. And if we don't have the data, then we write policy which can basically risk worsening existing social inequalities in our society. So what we want to do is to fill those data gaps and those policy gaps so that we have policy which pays attention to social inequality and doesn't worsen it. So you can go to the next slide. I'm just going to run through quickly over the last 3 years our project's kind of key outputs. And we did a piece of baseline research with the University College Cork with their School of Applied Social Studies. And that is the Feminist Climate Justice Baseline Report, which is the first of its kind published in Ireland, which really created a baseline review of Irish climate policy and its impact on women and marginalised communities in Ireland. And you can access that on either the National Women's Council or Community Work Ireland website. We also ran in 2024 for about 20 weeks from January to July a certificate programme in collaboration with Maynooth University's Department of Applied Social Studies. And there's a photo of our lovely graduates on your screen there. And what we did is what we took community leaders, activists, and people really active at the heart of their communities, and particularly wanting to target those working with maybe marginalized communities. We took them and for 20 weeks we gave them a real crash course on community development, feminist approaches, and climate justice for them to bring back into their own communities. We also still have running at nearly at 170 members the Feminist Communities for Climate Justice National Network for individuals and organisations alike to meet collectively to discuss issues of climate change using the climate justice lens. So, talking about it from a social equality perspective and also bringing it more down to the grassroots space. So, you can head to the next slide there. And then some of the rest of our project outputs, we do policy advocacy work. We would respond to consultations put out by the Irish government on issues around climate and climate adjacent policy. So we would also respond to consultations on things like public transport, on energy poverty and housing. And we do that in partnership with the members of our network and with the members of the National Women's Council and Community Work Ireland, particularly for those groups who might not have the capacity to respond to these kinds of consultations, and to make sure that our consultations are representative of our very diverse memberships in all three groups. We also produce a series of webinars, including this one, which you can access on the National Women's Council YouTube page. And we've done a number of webinars on some of the chapters of our baseline report that we did with University College Cork, for example. For the last month of the project, we'll be running a social media communications campaign on climate justice, which basically aims to help people think about climate action in a different way, in a bottom-up, grassroots, participatory way based on feminism and community development principles. And then finally, what we're here to discuss today are the project's two toolkits, one being to support assessment of climate impacts, future risks on communities, and climate justice proofing. So basically, this toolkit is to help people identify the climate impacts existing in their communities already. And then our second toolkit themed around developing campaigning strategies based on feminist climate justice. So you can head to the next slide. Before I continue and before I introduce our toolkits, I'd like to take a moment to introduce Rachel Doyle, who is the National Director of Community Work Ireland, our project partner. Rachel, as I said, is the Director of Community Work Ireland and has been a qualified community worker with over 30 years of working in the community sector locally and nationally. And her role as Director of Community Work Ireland means that she is responsible for leading the organisation in an exciting phase of development. So thank you very much, Rachel, for joining us. And she's going to speak to the importance of this work from Community Work Ireland's perspective.
Thanks, Vanessa, and good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see so many people here today. I suppose just to say, introduce Community Work Ireland to people who don't know us. We are the national network that supports and promotes community work or community development as an approach to tackling poverty and inequality and injustice. And we're a network of over 1,000 people and groups around Ireland. Many of you here are our members, and we work with our members around kind of highlighting the role that community development or community work plays in both addressing challenges such as climate change and other challenges facing our society. So we have been working on the issue of, we were established as the Community Workers Cooperative in 1981. I haven't been there since then. I'm not that old, but I have been working with Community Work Ireland for the past 10 years. And you know, since joining, and before I came, Community Work Ireland was involved in climate justice work with members. We opened kind of set up, I suppose, our climate justice working group back in 2010. And in 2012, we produced our first publication on climate change as an issue for community work. And Mary Robinson, in fact, wrote the foreword to that publication. I think Chloe's going to pop the link to it in the chat. It's Climate Justice, a Strategy Guide for the Community Sector in Responding to Climate Change. That was the title of it. And you know, we were responding to calls from our members to start doing more work on climate change back then. And one of the key recommendations from that report was the development of strategic alliances between the community sector and the environmental sector to strengthen the capacity of both to deal with environmental issues and build a just and sustainable society. So back then in 2012, there was this recognition of the need to bring those two sectors together. Community work with its focus on social change, on social justice, on inclusion and equality, and the environmental sector sharing a lot of those values too. But often what we found was that the community sector was working on one side and the environmental sector on the other, and very rarely came together in kind of collaboration. So in 2022, our next kind of big thing that we did was in 2022, we designed and delivered a kind of continuous practice development workshop for community workers on climate justice. And we produced a second guide in association with the All Ireland Endorsement Body for Community Work Education and Training. So again, another guide. And in all of the work that we did, we were very clear that we needed to ensure a strong gender dimension, a focus on women, the impact of climate change on women, especially women who are marginalised and living in poverty. So we always felt that there was a need to obviously to centre that in the work. So I think it was about maybe 5 years ago, we started looking at where could we get opportunities then to fund more of this climate work and to build the confidence and the capacity of community workers to take on this issue and to work in communities on climate justice and just transition. And so we actually did a funding application to Rethink Ireland, which we didn't get. We were pipped on that one. I think we nearly got it, for quite a similar project to the Feminist Communities for Climate Justice. Friends of the Earth came in and supported us on that application, but we didn't get it. And then there was another opportunity for funding, and we felt, look, there is a strong gender dimension to this work, a strong women's focus. We knew the Women's Council were thinking about looking at this in their strategic plan and membership strategy. So we came together then with the Women's Council to put together a joint project. And as Vanessa said, I think one of the biggest, like the big thing we really wanted to do was to design that course, Community Work in a Changing Ireland course, which is a minute designed course, but also takes different slants. So we wanted the slant of this one to be on climate justice, community work, feminism, and we wanted to bring together community workers and environmental activists and workers together to share thoughts, values, approaches, methodologies, and also to learn from each other and from the people who were delivering the course. So that was really important for us. And I think over 100 people applied to do that course. And obviously we couldn't take everyone, but the course is there, it's designed, and it can be, you know, rolled out again if there is a demand for that in the future. So I'll stop talking now because I think it's more important that you get a chance to share with each other in the workshops. So thank you for listening.
Thanks very much, Rachel, for your input. I'll move on now to introduce maybe what we're all here for, which is to talk about the toolkits. If you go to the next slide there, please. And we launched our two toolkits back in September, on September 11th. And these are the two toolkits: Creating Climate Justice Communities, which is a toolkit on the impacts of climate change in Irish communities, and then Community Action for Feminist Climate Justice, which is a toolkit to develop campaigning strategies for feminist climate justice. So you can head to the next slide there, and I can talk a little bit more about what we hoped to achieve with these toolkits and what we continue to hope to achieve with the toolkits. If we can go to the next slide, sorry. Yeah, perfect. So we printed a limited run of these toolkits physically, but we want them predominantly to be online or PDF access, because what we hope to do, because climate is such a rapidly evolving space in terms of the available science, in terms of the policy landscape, we hope that these can be living documents that can be updated. And also we have a lot of we have a lot of good resources hyperlinked in them that you can only access if you're using them online. They are designed primarily for community workers, but they are usable for anybody who calls themselves a facilitator and anybody facilitating a group. So that could be adult educators, climate coaches, conversation hosts, staff training events. We want everybody to be able to use these. These are also kind of a legacy piece for us, really, in that we've crammed about 3 years of project learnings into two toolkits. So, including our workshops, our previous webinars, engagement with our network members, our certificate program, and from our baseline research report. And what we want them to do is support communities in taking action on climate justice by building their capacity and understanding so that they feel more comfortable having these conversations. So you can go to the next slide there, please. Yeah, so this is toolkit number 1, Creating Climate Justice Communities. And we themed these toolkits kind of vaguely around the themes of educate, agitate, and organize. And so this toolkit is our educate, agitate, to develop facilitator knowledge on climate change, climate justice, and climate impacts on day-to-day life in Ireland. And that includes the impacts of climate policy created by our government. We created a kind of document that highlights key definitions that you might not know, the key policy in this area, and research documents. So we have little boxes that show you definitions of each of these things. The thematic areas and case studies we put in this toolkit are based around the areas we explored in our baseline research report. So energy and housing, transport, food, health, and care are all covered. There are 3 activities in this toolkit, and we'll be doing one of them with you in a few minutes' time. And it also includes at the end a section on how you can further engage your community in this kind of action after you've read up and become upskilled by using the toolkit. So if you go to the next slide, there's just kind of a preview of what the inside of the toolkit looks like. And here's kind of a sampling of a few pages. You can see one of our case studies on the traveller community there. You can see kind of our key document boxes. You can see some of our definitions. And then on the right side of the screen here, you can see one of our pages in our health section talking about things like eco-anxiety and eco-grief. So if you go to the next slide, then I can talk about our second toolkit, which is Community Action for Feminist Climate Justice. And this is the organize theme of the two toolkits. So this offers practical activities and exercises for communities to unpack the climate crisis as a feminist issue, and also to apply a feminist approach to their organising. And this is a very activity heavy toolkit compared to the first toolkit. There's 11 activities in here across multiple themes to build capacity and knowledge within groups. And really this toolkit helps you to understand these issues as structural issues. So linking climate change and climate injustice to things like sexism, like patriarchy, like capitalism. So linking all of these big problems together. And as you can see from some of the thematic areas, you can explore patriarchy and power using methods like creative storytelling, care-based feminist justice, and dreaming our feminist futures. And there is a big section of further tools and resources for you to access after you're finished with the toolkit. So if you go to the next slide, there's just kind of, again, an example of what the inside of the toolkit might look like. On the left here, we're talking about different forms of power. The middle piece, which was very popular when we were testing this toolkit, about the examples of what a diversity welcome might look like when you're hosting a group. And then you can see what one of the activities might look like here on the left side, a power mapping or the triangle of power activity. But I think that's enough of us talking about the toolkits, and they'll be linked in the chat and there'll be a QR code at the end. What we really like to do, if you want to move to the next slide, is to get you all to, if you want to ask any questions so far, and then after that, we'll get stuck into actually testing out one of the activities in the toolkits ourselves. So if anybody has any questions, you can put up your hand or you can type it into the chat and Chloe will make sure to flag it with myself or with Rachel. And if there's no questions at this point either, that's okay too, because we will have a second Q&A at the end after you're done with the activity. Okay, so that's all right if there's no questions at this point or comments at
Vanessa,
this
I
point.
think
Oh,
unless it's my internet connection, to me, you.
oh, I might be
Sorry,
having.
Vanessa, I just thought your internet was unstable, but it could be mine, but I just thought it was a little bit. Seems
Oh,
okay again
okay.
now.
You can hear me now?
Yeah, I was hearing it too as well, Rachel.
Oh, that might be me.
Yeah, but you might turn off your camera just to
Okay.
strengthen it.
Okay, is that any better? Okay, if you can
I
hear
can
me
hear you
now.
now
Yes.
fine, Vanessa.
Okay, perfect. So if anybody has any questions, you can feel free to put them into the chat and we might come to them at the end. But for now, we might go to the next slide and allow you guys to kind of test out one of the activities from our toolkit. So next slide again, then we're going to look at one of the activities in toolkit number one, a very condensed version of it, mind you, because we normally allow an hour for this activity, but we wanted to make sure that we can have a kind of a hands-on approach in this particular webinar. So this activity is called Considering Intersectional Climate Impacts. And if you go to the next slide, then we can kind of talk about what this activity will involve. So we want you to take a look kind of at this diagram that we've presented. This is basically the green transition at the heart, and then surrounding the green transition are communities or groups in Ireland who might be already suffering from marginalisation or who might be tending to live in poverty or who are definitely not properly represented in existing policy or in policy making or decision making spaces around climate. So if you go to the next slide there. And what we want you all to do, and there'll be another slide with further instructions, so no worries, is to take one of these communities. You'll all be put into groups in breakout rooms in a moment. And what we want you to do is to pick one of these communities or two, if that suits you either, and just to consider their level of access to the kind of net zero or green transition, if you prefer that term, as it exists and as it is given to us by government right now. So, for example, will they be able to access retrofitting or energy efficiency upgrades for their home? Will their health be impacted by pollution of our environment? Do they have an active role in environmental decision making at local and national levels? And there's a few more prompts there, and they'll be put into the chat as well so that you're able to access them in your breakout rooms. So if you go to the next slide there. So here are the instructions. So you're going to be put into breakout groups for about 15 to 20 minutes. Again, we want you to pick one of the groups listed in the diagram and then consider the prompts on the previous slide, or you can consider your own prompts that aren't included there if you'd like. But really what we want you to think about is, are there barriers to that group's participation in the green transition as it currently exists. And just to prepare for our feedback session when we all come back, make sure somebody in the group is there to take notes and is assigned to kind of take notes. Make sure that everybody in your group has a chance to contribute to the discussion as well. And we'd also, if you can assign somebody in your group to report back on your key discussion points, and to kind of make yourselves visible and available when we come back together in 20 minutes time. So we have Leah, our tech here at the National Women's Council, is about to put you all into breakout groups, and I'll make sure that these slides are in the chat for you now so that everybody can access them. So in a few moments, you should all get a prompt to enter a breakout room.
And just on ISL, Vanessa.
Oh yes, and if anybody
needs ISL,
if there's any participant here who needs ISL interpretation in their breakout room, if you could use the raise hand function on Zoom, just so that we're able to kind of identify you quickly. And we'll make sure that our ISL interpreter, Leah, is in the breakout room with you.
And there's just one slide in the chat so far, Vanessa.
Oh, they're both in there now.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, so you should have a window should have come up now for you to join a breakout room. So if everybody can join your rooms, and we'll meet you back here in about 20 minutes and we'll make sure that to give you a signal. Right, I think we should have everybody. Yeah, I can see people starting to fill up again in the participant list. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you all had good conversations and that you're ready to feed back to us what you discussed and what you maybe thought of this condensed version of the activity. So I'm just going to go to the groups as I have them in front of me from the breakout rooms report that Zoom put together. So if the person assigned from room 1, which was Anna, Annie Jo, Breed, Lorraine, and Rachel, if your kind of group representative wants to feed back to us.
We didn't really have a group representative. I was kind of facilitating, but does anybody else want to report back, or will I?
Happy for you too.
I think you've nominated yourself.
Go mad. Okay. We picked the low income category, and we started chatting about energy issues. So we said not only are low energy options out of reach for most low income households, but also even the information is not there. Even when you're relying on the PPN, it's still confusing. So if you're in a certain sort of eco chamber or whatever, you might get the information, but the general public wouldn't have access to understanding what grants are there, understanding what the issues are. Maybe if you're building a house, you may have that information, but it's not for the general public. Then we were talking about people, the 300,000 people who are in electricity or gas arrears. Relying on hot water bottles. The SEAI, people were saying, are very unhelpful about what grants people are eligible for. People are resorting to credit union loans, but there's an interest cost there. Rental properties, people renting are generally lower income, more vulnerable, and local authorities should be obliged to retrofit properties. The same with housing. Well, housing bodies are doing okay, but local authorities not so much, and the private rental sector needs to do better. And we talked briefly about transport and the inaccessibility of public transport and electric cars for low income households. Well, more so the rural. If you're in a rural area, you really need cars, regardless of income. But then obviously electric is further out of reach. We talked about things like carpooling, and there's structural barriers in terms of insurance issues. And really, then, I mean, in conclusion, one of the comments that was made is that the onus is always going back to the individual who only has enough or a certain amount of power and a certain amount of knowledge and headspace. And, especially if you're a low income, you've already got enough stressors in your life. So, really, there needs to be more structural interventions to facilitate the transition for more people. Yeah, and to not always put the onus on the lowest common denominator, which is the individual. So that's pretty much what we were discussing.
Thank you very much, Rachel. That was a great, I think, account of what sounded like a really good discussion as well. So thanks very much. I'll move to group two now, which was John, Mary, Sharon, Sinaida, Susan, and Teresa. If your group's representative wants to feedback.
I'm a little bit like Rachel. I did a little bit talking as well. So is there anybody else wants to contribute from my group?
I think you may have nominated yourself.
Okay. Okay. Well, yeah, we did have lots of conversation, I suppose, and echoing some of what Rachel was saying, the digital literacy and the online and the language being, very, very not very accessible for people, and, too many acronyms, too much jargon, and not accessible for, not, it should be in plain language. Accessing information, and that's, I suppose, is the language again. Someone mentioned leadership in our group, and I suppose policy making, like, I suppose I'm a sustainable energy mentor, and I was just sharing with the group that the challenges that are there are very real, and there is no way that it's a just transition. It's a really top-down approach, and I suppose there's one, I suppose, fully funded warmer home scheme, but again, there's so much criteria you have to meet, and there's specific social welfare payments, and if you don't meet those meet that criteria, you're not eligible. And one of them is not the pension. Unfortunately, you must be on fuel allowance. And I was saying as well, we were looking at the bigger picture. The housing crisis is trickling down into families, and I suppose depriving them of being eligible in the first instance, because if their family move back in, it's a means tested, so they lose their fuel allowance. So they become, they're like the onus on them then, to go sort it yourself. And yeah, so I suppose there's so many hoops that people have to jump through, and really the finance is not there. The grants are not there for the people that are really experiencing energy poverty. And we actually chose older people. And yeah, I suppose, yeah. So I'm not sure if I covered everything there that we were chatting about, but it's basically a top-down approach with the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, unfortunately. And there was some really good suggestions, that as mentors that we can actually try and feed it back. And it was, I suppose, widely shared as well about the fines that we're facing, the 29 billion euro fines that we're, if we don't meet our targets. So why isn't that money being escalated and used, to support people? And policy changing is definitely part of that. And it's, it's who's in power, who's holding the power, and who's holding the purse. And unfortunately, the people, that are on the ground and grassroots people, they're just not getting the support. And it's not a just transition, in my opinion, in any shape or form.
Thanks very much, Teresa. Just if anybody wants to add anything else from their group that they feel like they might have missed, or something they wanted to bring up in the breakout room but forgot, feel free also to use the chat function to continue adding any contributions. I'll move on to group three now, which was Anne, Emily, Irene, Jerome, Megan, and Tracy. So if anybody from that group, your representative, wants to feedback.
Yeah, I was given that task, and you kind of learned that maybe you shouldn't speak so much, then you're not given other jobs. But anyway, yeah, we focused on mixed ability, And it kind of morphed into kind of from a rural perspective as well. So so in looking at that, we had some great examples, you know, of grow your own foods and stuff like that, you know, from schools projects, to looking then at people with mixed abilities and how do we engage and include those in any projects and programs that are going on in the area. I suppose the examples were that, you know, in the schools example, like children learn about food, you know, it's not just that it lands on the table, but it has a story, you know, the whole way through. And it's about learning responsibilities for the children as well. You know, they're out in nature, they're out in the fresh air. So there's lots of benefits all around. However, for people with mixed ability, that's not always accessible for them. They may not be able to reach down, you know, they may need raised beds, then, you know, other considerations have to take place. And, you know, it's an opportunity for intergenerational projects, maybe, where younger or more able-bodied people can support kind of a mixed process. We were looking as well at the cost of homegrown and, you know, organic foods as well. And it's much more expensive for people who are on lower incomes. And let's face it, most of the country is on lower incomes at the moment. And we're also looking at the value of home cooking. So it's not just the ingredients, then you're cooking at home, and energy kind of is part of that story as well. And then, you know, we have links with other providers. So for example, Meals on Wheels, where are they in this mix in terms of the types of foods that they provide and where does that food come from? So there is a need for a much, much wider kind of look at it, really. We were also looking then in terms of accessibility, not just about food, but accessibility in terms of transport in rural areas. How do you get somebody to a project? How do you get somebody to, you know, to gardens? You know, what is that engagement like? Is somebody going to collect them, bring them back? There's big responsibilities there. We also mentioned about, you know, carpool sharing and stuff like that. And again, the insurance and other costs that are involved with that. Energy costs are always there on the agenda. And we were saying that it's about looking at the intersectionality as well. So you may be a person with mixed abilities. You may be an older person, you may be pre-retirement, you may be in a rural area. All of these things all compound to really add to that story. We also had examples there of, you know, given voices for people with mixed abilities for engagement and participation in decision making. And it's, you know, at the moment it's been said that there's not enough room for the listeners. We really need to make room for the listeners as well. And that's a really exceptional skill to have in terms of then, well, we've heard everybody's kind of feedback now, and how do we move forward with that? So I think, you know, combined with some of the other responses that we've had from group 1 and 2, there's been a lot of similarities, I think, as well. So cost is a big factor, even though we have kind of a middle income Ireland as well. You know, people that are retiring, that's a big change in income and other things as well. We also have people like in homes that are underutilized, and how do we provide supports for that? So yeah, there is cause for a much, much wider look at the picture and greater engagement. So unless the group wants to add to that.
Thanks very much for that, Anne. I'm just conscious of time because I know our ISL interpreter will have to leave on the hour. So if anybody from the group wants to put anything in the chat, I'll move on quickly to group 4. And our tech Leah behind the scenes, you might put on the last slide just so folks can access the toolkits via the QR code. But room 4, I have 2 Marys. I have Christine, Eileen, Laura, and Sinead. So if the representative from that group wants to come in.
I can feedback if people are okay with that. So we were talking about rural communities and also older communities. With rural, the feedback was that the sustainable energy community scheme is not working. The consultants are getting all the money, even though the community are putting in an awful lot of free hours, and that kind of the possible actions that result from all the assessments are not being followed through on. The exception to that is Community Action Local Louisburg and call.ie, or they have some website anyway with that. They've been exceptional in getting things done, in networking with local plumbers and other tradespeople, and also ensuring that there's aftercare for the community. We also talked about storms hitting, like Storm Eowyn. One finding from that is that now that kind of all heating has been turned digital, a lot of older people, they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to reset it or get it working again. So that was a real problem, and there had to be a lot of local people kind of going to houses, helping them. So that's something that needs to be planned for, I suppose. And also after the storm, there were meetings in county councils discussing, I suppose, how the response went. And at one of those meetings in one county, only 2 people kind of connected the storm with climate. And given that these storms are going to be ever more frequent, that's a problem. So the conversation was more about backup generators, which obviously are very fossil fuel intensive. And Monaghan was the only county that someone in the group knew who had kind of given guidance on how households can prepare themselves for a storm like this in the future. So there's a big climate adaptation question there. Someone mentioned that the local credit union have led very well on some community energy, no, not community energy, some kind of scheme in terms of getting loans for retrofits, actually, for houses, getting loans for retrofits. And the credit unions have an interest in selling loans, obviously, but also they're very well networked in the local community. So they can signpost things and maybe achieve more rollout. That was most of it. I'm sure one point about there was a call for getting funding for communities, getting funding for solar panels. And in one county, all of the grants went to GAA clubs, maybe 15 GAA clubs, because they had the capacity, they could dig into the technical detail and write the best reports. So that's a problem, that other community groups didn't have the expertise maybe or experience to write the best funding applications and get that money. If I've left out anything, please.
Thank you very much for that, Mary. I'm just conscious we're at the hour now, but thank you, everybody. I think such diverse conversations came out, even though there were similarities. I think there were diversities in each of them that really reflect how much of an issue, how climate change kind of permeates into so many different angles of our lives. And we hope really with the toolkits that they help people build capacity, build their own education on talking about the many issues that climate change already touches in our lives. And you can see the QR code on the screen will take you to the toolkits. I know Chloe linked them earlier on in the chat as well. But I'm also, if you have any feedback on this activity as well, even though it was a very shortened version, I'm going to stick my email into the chat there now. Please feel free to email any feedback you have. We really want to know how usable these toolkits are, if they're user friendly for people who are facilitating the conversations, and if you do use them and you find they're good to use with groups or there's pieces that you would change, please do get in touch and let us know. But for now, thank you very, very much for joining us during your lunch hour. It's much appreciated. Thank you to both our Leahs, our ISL interpreter, and also Leah from the Women's Council who provided tech support to us today. Thank you to Chloe from Community Work Ireland, who was working hard in the chat, putting in links for all of you and also helping with some tech pieces as well. And thank you to Rachel Doyle from Community Work Ireland for her contribution too. This will be recorded and up on YouTube in a bit of an edited format for you all to access afterwards. But thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, and I hope the rest of your day is good. Thanks very much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.